Thank you very much, Joe. Let's bring in Niall Stanage from The Hill. Niall, good to see you as always. Happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday to you too, Adrienne. Great to see you.
You know, the former president's outtakes on that video announcement, we could talk about that for about an hour. I bet you if we took every single sitting president and showed every single recording and take, we could hyper-criticize each one. Is this particular president getting extra attention because of this committee?
Well, I mean, to be fair, Adrienne, would we really find outtakes of somebody saying that an election that had been decided wasn't over? I mean, it's not the fact that there are outtakes. It's the fact that Trump, in that outtake that was part of Joe's report, would not accept the result of an election that had clearly, by that point, been finalized. That's what made that issue so dramatic, and to my mind, one of the most vivid moments from last night's hearing.
In terms of the former president and Vice President Pence, they're set to hold dueling campaign rallies in Arizona today. Former Vice President Pence has said that he and former President Trump have made amends, that they were able to have an amicable split, so to speak. So when we're hearing a lot of the news, basically putting them at odds with one another, and then with this event in Arizona, what are the American people expected to take away from all of this?
Well, I mean, as for the events of the day themselves, clearly that radio transmission that was played from Vice President Pence's security detail was very alarming and I think had a lot of visceral force. As to the path ahead, the former vice president says that he is proud of what he terms the Trump-Pence record in office. It does appear like he is positioning himself to at least be ready for a presidential run. I mean, he's certainly making overtures in some of the early voting states. But of course, the big question hanging over 2024 on the Republican side is whether the former president himself enters the race.
And it will be interesting because he's appeared to make it very plain that he would be running, and yet not quite saying it in so many words. So we're still deciphering. Let's talk about the current president, President Biden, getting COVID. Of course, everybody and their mama talking about it, though he has mild symptoms, he's double vaxxed, he's boosted. But there have been concerns about the president's health. He had that stumble, that fall off of his bicycle. He, of course, is of a mature age, we'll say, like fine wine. But the latest poll numbers do show that there are people, including Democrats, who are concerned about the president's health. So what do you think the impact is of a mild case of COVID?
I think there is some impact, and I think the reason for that is the reason that you just outlined. It feeds into an existing narrative of concern about President Biden. He is 79 years old. There are a number of people, large number of people in polling who suggest that he shouldn't run for a second term. Now, a mild case of COVID, if that's what it ends up being, doesn't rule you out of doing that, of course. But it is traditionally problematic for presidents to appear ill or less than vigorous. I mean, there's a whole history of rather infamous incidents, from President Carter collapsing when he was jogging to the elder President Bush vomiting at a dinner with the Japanese Prime Minister. Those things, perhaps unfairly, become emblematic of a larger question about vigor. And I think that's where the danger lies for President Biden.
Well, there is also the concern about the optics in terms of the vaccinations. Do vaccines work? Is there a point in being boosted? Is there a new strain of COVID that we should all be on the edge of our seats concerned about? What do you think the White House is doing in terms of playing their cards correctly with this latest diagnosis?
The White House is really trying to make this case that President Biden is suffering an exemplar for why people should take those extra steps, like, for example, getting boosted. Dr. Ashish Jha, the White House COVID coordinator, was very clear about that at yesterday's press briefing, really emphasizing, firstly, the contagiousness of the new BA.5 variant, but also saying that President Biden's chances of serious illness or hospitalization were dramatically lower because he's been double vaccinated, because he's been double boosted, and because he is taking Paxlovid. Though the argument is that with those things, yes, you may still get COVID, but the chances of there being really grave consequences from it are much, much lower.
I think there are a lot of people in this country who have become very skeptical. We've seen statistics recently that they don't trust medical experts anymore. They don't trust Dr. Fauci. They don't trust the CDC. And the fact is, if people could kind of be a little bit more plain about what this BA variant does in the body of a person who is vaccinated, who is unvaccinated, would be interesting. But Niall, we'll save that for another day. I know I'm going to get to talk to you again this morning, so I'm excited about that.
Twice the fun for both of us, Adrienne.
That's right. Double the fun. Niall, thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.